Thank you, Don. And I want to thank Hung and Sarah for inviting me. Especially Hung, this was a conversation we had last May. It seems like it was yesterday, and all of a sudden it's February. And we had been talking about dates over the summer, and all of a sudden it's here. And so I'm really happy to be here and talk to you about this topic. It has nothing to do with my research, but it has everything to do with my everyday life. These are issues that I often find myself confronting, thinking about, kind of educating faculty about, because these are things that it's not part of our graduate education. We're not taught to think about kind of ethical implications in how we structure our syllabi, for example, or how we interact with students, or how we address disability issues in our classes. We're taught to be top-notch researchers. We're taught to be, I guess, adequate instructors. In my PhD, there was never really any attention. We need you to teach this class. Go teach it. Now go to the library, right? So, often these kind of intangible issues that we face periodically as instructors or administrators, it's not an everyday thing for many of us, but it can have a huge impact. It can, as we see in the news currently with Michigan State, this can be something that people didn't realize was an issue. They kind of blew it off, and then all of a sudden it blows up. And so what I would like to do today is have a conversation. As you may notice, I have no PowerPoint. I hope that's not disorienting to anybody. So, for this kind of issue, as Hung said, we first started talking about this at a new chairs workshop, and it was one piece in a larger workshop. We talked about everything from budget to strategic planning, and this was one component, and she asked me to talk kind of more extensively about this specific issue. And I did prepare a handout, so if for some reason you kind of drift off, at least you have something to kind of anchor you afterward. And I've tried to frame it in a way that offers very specific kind of tips and questions to ask yourself, maybe give it to the back, as you're kind of proceeding, because a lot of these are things that you would hope are common sense, but what I've learned in my various kind of administrative roles is that often human beings don't adhere to common sense very often, and will kind of let ego dominate, or often, especially as educators, we think, well, this is a teachable moment. Don't approach any of these issues as teachable moments. And so my talk will be also interspersed with anecdotes. So for example, there's one lesson I learned about an academic dishonesty case. It's no longer called plagiarism, it's now academic dishonesty. And I had a student who had a kind of some sort of learning disorder, but he wasn't registered with the Office of Disability Services as having a learning disorder. And so I didn't make accommodations for him. And there was one paper where he received a 0 because he had plagiarized it. But I thought, well, there's something going on here, so I'll just sit down with him and kind of walk him through kind of what went wrong, and have him redo the paper. And then later on, down the road, he gets a D in the class, protests the grade. I said, well, he got a D because he got a 0 on a paper that he plagiarized, and the college says, well, did you submit the academic dishonesty form? I said, no. I just felt like, it didn't warrant that. And so my associate dean was very upset with that because, and what I learned from that experience is there are processes in place to help us. We may think of this as a bureaucratic imposition, but we really need to take the other point of view, that a process is a way to remove personality, remove emotion from the equation, but it's also a way to offer the student due process. So the student's complaint was, I didn't have a chance, the professor didn't offer me the opportunity to contest the academic dishonesty, right? So the process is there to offer the student a mechanism through which they can rebut. And so if we try to say, well, we're going to just handle this in-house, on our own, then you've kind of created more problems for yourself. And especially for some of the other issues that I'll mention, knowing the processes, and you'll see on the sheet, like know the department, college, university, policies and processes. Like those are there to help you, not hinder you. One thing I want to mention, because in the title it talks specifically about ethical and legal issues in language classes. And there are many legal and ethical issues that arise that are common to just any class. But I think something that I think is particular for those of us that are language experts is that we have a unique position to kind of be aware of legal and ethical issues. We are experts in communication, and especially communication across cultures. We're experts in representation and thinking about how things look from another point of view. And so we should be kind of uniquely aware of some of the issues that arise and how to communicate and talk through those issues and how to channel them. You know, I think we're also in a unique position to encourage empathy for diversity among our students that also lead to some of these ethical issues. And so, you know, one thing I did want to do is actually start off with a quiz, if that's okay. And this is, and Hong knows this, she's taken this quiz before, so nobody can talk to Hong about the answers. But it'll just take a couple of minutes. So, and then I'll give you the answers later. We won't talk about it right away. I think now I've given too many to somebody, so. But this is a FERPA quiz. Is everybody familiar with FERPA? You've heard that word? Does anybody know what it means?
Federal?
No. Wrong. Family, education, or Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, right? So this is something that is important for us to know about because these are like, when can you share grades? Who can you share grades with? What information is protected? What information is not protected? So a lot of, you know, because we're in a university, a lot of what we do is work with data and information, and especially kind of private information. So take a few minutes, I'll stop talking, and you can take your quiz. And I will be grading this. This does count. So I don't want to like go one by one through it. Like, it's a little boring. And I do have the answers here I can give you. But just in general, like when we're talking about FERPA and privacy and educational rights, what are some general guidelines? Like what do you all know or think you know about FERPA? Like what are some general things? Like when you hear FERPA, like what do you need to keep in mind?
You're not supposed to give out information.
Oh, okay, what kind of information?
Only students have access to their own information, academic information.
Okay, students have access to their own academic information, but what kind of information?
We don't want to do the trifecta of their name, birth date, and an identifying number. Those would be three things.
Yeah, so anything that is not directory information is kept under wraps. So grades, their student identification number, you know, things like that. So especially like with my staff with documents, we just moved to a new building, and so we spent the summer shredding documents, partially to get rid of documents that we've had since the 80s, and also because a lot of the documents that were now outdated had identifying information on them, so you can't just throw them away, right? So what other things about FERPA? Any age, specific age we're thinking about that a student above or under a certain age has or does not have privacy rights? 18, right? So if they're under 18 and say a parent calls, that is not information that is protected because they're a minor. But if they're above 18 and a parent calls, so what I try to make sure I haven't verified this, but I tell them there is a form that is available on the Georgia State website through legal that is just a very simple form for a student. So you could just pull it, like, so if a student wants to, like if a parent wants information, you say, well, I need your son or daughter to come into my office and sign. You know, you have to have a physical waiver that's signed to be able to share any kind of information. Because you may have heard of helicopter parents. They're out there, and so they will barrage with calls. More if it's related to, say, a grade appeal, or my son or daughter needs this grade to graduate, or whatever. I actually don't have many conversations with parents, but every once in a while it happens. Or, for example, as professionals, and we're in constant communication. Well, have you had this student in class? Or, well, how did they do? And you have these like informal conversations. But I've had some faculty say, well, could you send me the paper that they wrote and tell me what grade they got on that? I cannot share that kind of information with another faculty member. What about, for example, if in an office at the end of a semester, do you all collect, say, from GTAs, the grades, like the grade book and the grades, like in a central location at all? Because, yeah, we do, because we don't know, like, if the GTA is, especially if it's a limited term faculty member, they may not be returning. They may be, especially if it's over the summer and a student has a question about their grade and the chair needs to look at it. And so I really dug deep this past summer and talked with legal, and I talked with advising, and is this something that is okay with FERPA, where we have people send their grades to staff and we keep it in a central location that's password protected and it's hidden away, nobody has open access to it, like faculty can't get to it. Is that okay? And what do you think the answer was? So that way we have the grade books and we have the final grades. And it was okay because the staff have access through other means to the grade. They have access to Banner. They can get into the system and see those grades anyway. So they are, and there's a word for it, like informed employees or something like that. But it's these like, there's no fine line, or there's no bright, huge, noticeable line between ethical and unethical, and it's, you can, especially with FERPA, like privacy, or is this protected, or is that protected? And so the main takeaway that I want you all to walk away with today is there are people you can ask. If you don't know, don't assume, like pick up a phone and call, ask a chair, call legal. They're happy to answer those questions if it means avoiding a lawsuit. Like, they're happy to avoid a lawsuit. And on the contrary, like, if I would always joke that, because there was one year I was at a different university and we organized a film series, and we were talking with legal about whether we had fair use rights to show the films. And I joked, yeah, because I really want to know, because I think it would look poorly on my tenure dossier if I had brought a lawsuit against the university. I'm just thinking that might hinder my prospects at getting tenure. So are there other questions about FERPA, or we can kind of come back to it if you want. What are some other like legal or ethical issues that just as educators we face in higher ed, maybe particularly, or I mean, are there other things maybe you've heard of? There's specific titles or kind of other issues that, because FERPA is a big one. There's some other big ones. Title IX. I'm not Title VI. I mean, I'm familiar with Title VI funding, but I'm not sure with Title. But Title IX is the big, and that deals with sexual harassment. It came out of sports, but for language departments, it's a big one that affects, for example, study abroad. It's a major concern with study abroad. And what if I told you you are all responsible employees? Do you know what that means?
What is it?
You're a responsible employee. And I don't mean that you're doing good work, you're really responsible. In a legal sense, it has a specific meaning. It has a denotation, a very specific meaning.
Agents of
Kind of, but it's specifically connected to Title IX. And what it means is if you hear of or get wind of, or a student, whether a student directly tells you, I was sexually assaulted or I have this trauma, you have a duty to report it. If the student comes, and so this is where the line gets blurred. If a student comes to you and says, something happened to me at a party this weekend, I'm really, or you just notice they're upset and they say, well, something happened to me this weekend, but I don't want you to tell anybody. You cannot promise that. So one of the things I try and work with faculty on is have kind of some talking points. So like if they say, I don't want you to tell anybody about it, like have something to say like, well, I want to help you, and I can't promise you that, right? So don't make promises that you can't keep, because then it could kind of make other problems and it could hurt the student. I mean, at the end of the day, the goal here is to serve the needs of the students, and the education of the student is beyond the classroom. It's educating them as a person and protecting them and cultivating them and molding them as a kind of conscientious global citizen, right? So with Title IX, and this goes with faculty, and so you want to know who your Title IX officer is. You'll have an office of diversity and equal opportunity on campus, and that will be where the Title IX person is if it's dealing with faculty, if it's an issue with faculty or faculty and students. If it's something that is faculty related, there'll be an office of whatever it's called, equal opportunity and diversity. Different places have different names, but it's that. There you go. So that, and your Title IX officer, and so what I try to do as chair is organize different presentations for faculty, and I offer them food to incentivize them to attend. But the ones that I really try and do periodically, like recurrently, is there's a great presentation that our Office of Disability Services does, and the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity, about Title IX, and the other just about disability issues. But also, like if it's a possible Title IX issue between students, then for us, like that goes to Dean of Students. Like, so depending on, so just knowing, okay, who, and if you don't know who to call, just call somebody, call your chair, right? So like the chair will know who to call. Like, but you, as a responsible employee, you have a duty to call, like to report it. You can't, because then, and this is in these questions at the beginning. I don't have a copy of my own handout, but at the beginning there's questions about like what would be the consequences. Oh, that's the quiz, this one. What concerns might arise, and just kind of like extrapolating, like if I don't do something, or if I do something, like what are the logical kind of consequences of my actions, right? And again, as graduate students in PhD programs, we're trained to think, well, we work in isolation, we're humanists, we work in isolation, we go to the library, we do our research, and that's that. But now, in the classroom, and especially with colleagues, we're interacting with human beings. Like it's more than just our research. And how could a given situation become a violation of policy? How will this, what would be the potential negative consequences? And it's amazing how fast things can snowball. So we're all overworked, we're all really busy, but this is something like if there's something that even smells a little off, get on top of it. Like, don't let something smolder because all of a sudden you have a fire the size of California, right? So, especially as chair, like I had a couple of issues my first year as chair that, it was just circumstances. There was a student who had come to my associate chair and had complained about a faculty member. The faculty member somehow heard that the student complained and then got upset that we hadn't talked to her about it. And I was like, well, I haven't talked to the student yet. And so now the faculty member is going to the dean, and it's just everybody take a deep breath, take a step back, but it's amazing how fast things can go south. So you want to make sure you're communicating, you're keeping your chair informed. Please, keep, as a chair, like my number one pet peeve is being blindsided, because that's not fun. And keep communication open with the various offices, know your policies, and follow through, like get on top of things. And also know there's support mechanisms out there. So we talk about Title IX. You know, another thing that is interesting, especially if we think of things like study abroad, or we think of kind of approaches to language learning, and it's very interactive. And so you develop rapport with students, I think, more than in some other disciplines, because you hear talk of flipped classrooms and things like that. It's like, well, that's what languages have been doing for 25 years. Like, that's the whole basis of the communicative approach, right? And the thing is, students feel more engaged, they feel closer to, and so that kind of personal, professional distinction sometimes blurs, and then you take them on a study abroad experience, and this is a transformative experience for them. It's very emotional. So then all of a sudden, like, there's this closeness and this bond with faculty sometimes that it blurs that professional and personal. And so, I've had to talk with faculty about friending students on Facebook. And so, now in the new age of technology and social media, it's like, well, these kinds of things, like, you think of photos that pop up of faculty or deans or presidents, like, drinking with students. Like, okay, well, that's one thing, but that's an extreme example. But then you have faculty friending on Facebook with the students who are currently in their classes, like, what, or asking students to babysit for them and think, so like, there's like, maybe that's not a great idea, and then, I talk with graduate students about their Google persona. Like, if somebody Googles your name, like, what's going to come up? And now I find, like, yeah, maybe I should have that same conversation with faculty. Like, be careful what you post online, because it could blur an ethical boundary, and somebody may see it and think, what in the hell is going on over at that university, right? And I also I've had to have conversations with faculty, where I say, well, I think this might not pass the AJC test, which means, like, if somebody from the AJC were to catch wind of this and it appears in the paper, it would not be good. So, and it could be something small, like, you just never know. And so I'm always like, just let's be aware. Like, self-awareness is a good thing, like mindfulness, self-awareness, like being kind of conscious of our actions, and especially in email communications. This semester I had to have a conversation with a faculty member about an email they sent to a school board, and I was like, well, what if we had taken a different tone? What if it was more collaborative? What if it was more constructive, an invitation to dialogue, rather than saying, you all are idiots and here's why? So a lot of it is just like, okay, be more mindful, suppress your emotional reaction, and take the high road. You'd be amazed at what kind of positive reactions you'll get from that. I brought some information about copyright and fair use. With language departments, often we're teaching texts that are not readily available. I don't know about you all, but we often have issues with the bookstore being able to obtain certain texts that may, and it makes it hard to do a really innovative class on a special topic where you want to bring in all kinds of different types of media. And so you think, well, what if I just take what I have and I'll just rip a copy of this film and I'll put it on iCollege or whatever. Like, will somebody find out? Is that okay? Is that not okay? So I brought, and I can give this to you later, I brought a fair use checklist. And I looked for one on Emory's, usually the library has it or the legal office has it. I didn't see one. I just did a quick search to see, but usually it pops up as a PDF. And so it's just a checklist that gives you a sense of, like, am I going to get sued or not? Like, and so it's pretty useful. So I brought copies of that for people. But what about disability issues? Like, what do you know? What policies or what should we keep in mind with regards to the Office of Disability Services or disability issues? If anybody was in the MLA, I directed a organized and directed a session in New York that was about disability issues in the profession. So interest day was representations in literature and film, but then also kind of practical issues, like say with study abroad and specifically in language classes. Have you all faced issues with students who have disabilities and accommodations?
I can say interestingly, so I direct the graduate ESL program, and it's amazing how many faculty call me to assess if there's a disability, language disability. And I often have to say, I don't have any expertise in that. You need to contact the Office of Disabilities.
But what do you mean a language disability?
So they see in the writing, so maybe when a student is writing something, they start to suspect that there's maybe
Like dyslexia or something? Okay,
or
okay.
something along those lines. And because we have English as a second language, that makes us experts in that somehow. But anyway,
I'm glad you affirmed that, yeah.
Anyway, so I think as a language instructor, sometimes we're put up as experts in something that we may or
Right.
may not.
Yeah.
be.
Well, and sometimes we'll get students in our department who are coming from a different department that has a language requirement, and they're trying to get out of the language requirement by saying that they have a disability that impedes them from learning a language. And there's actually no disability that impedes you from learning a language. There's no gene that says, you know what, you just cannot, like, there are cognitive disabilities that may slow their ability or create certain obstacles, but there are accommodations that can be made. So, I mean, but has anybody received that, gotten that line, like, oh yeah. So we say, well, you know, but I can't just say on my own, well, you know, actually that's kind of bunk, like they're just trying to get out of the requirement. I can't say that, just like you can't say, well, yeah, this person definitely has. They have to go to again, you channel it into the process, send them to Office of Disability Services. I can't make accommodations for students who have not gone on record with ODS as having a disability that needs an accommodation. And I've always been happy to make accommodations for students. Like, and again, you know, we think oftentimes of disabilities as physical disabilities, visible, you know, disabilities, but I don't know if, I mean, there's more and more literature, and there's actually a whole conference about depression in students, and depression on college campuses is becoming, it is a huge issue. What's becoming more apparent is just awareness about that. I mean, I don't think it's like all of a sudden now depression was an issue on college campuses. I think it's always been, and now we're finally kind of acknowledging that. But you also have cognitive disabilities, these kind of invisible, like, it could be a learning disability, or they could be on the spectrum, so to speak, you know. And so one of the first ethical questions that comes up is like, if they're not registered with ODS, like how do you open that conversation? Like say, you know what, I think there's something off with you. Like, you know, you may need help. Like you can't say that, right? You need to be very careful about how you approach that. But you want to make sure that if they need an accommodation, because there's also, you know, there could be shame involved. They could like they may not have been diagnosed. Like you just don't know what's going on. So there's all kinds of like, but that's where our communicative strategies give us certain kind of tools and a toolkit that we can talk to them and suss out. And you could even call somebody from ODS and say, you know, I would like to consult with you on this and maybe offer some strategies of how I can open the conversation with them. But I've had students who, you know, they need an hour and a half to take an hour exam. Like they need time and a half. Or one student who was excellent, she would be fine just in class like this, like just talking. But as soon as there was an exam, she would get panic attacks. Being in a room with other people taking the exam would give her panic attacks. So she would come to, we have a testing room, which I would imagine you have some location where they can. So it's no big deal. Like it's just, but knowing that. Now one year I was a graduate student, I had a student who was blind in class. And again, just having communication, he had somebody who would read the assignments to him and a tutor. But then one time in class, he was a graduate student, and one time after class he came up to me, and it's one of those things where you all of a sudden become more aware of your own actions in class. And so he asked, because I use a lot of PowerPoints, and this was before PowerPoint. I had a lot of overhead slides. And he said, well, when you're showing something, could you describe it a little bit more? Because that would be really helpful. And I was like, oh, so stupid, But it was really, again, we're trained in kind of talking about other cultures. And so we already are predisposed to this awareness of kind of cultural differences or just needs of others. So I think we're in a unique position to really do this well. But depression, again, I want to mention that again. So one thing actually we're talking about doing in our department, because learning a language stresses people out. And so in students, especially if we're not as focused on proficiency, and sometimes we can be strict grammarians and want to focus on the accuracy, and that stresses students out. And so what we're talking about doing in our department this maybe midterms and finals is connecting with an organization locally to have therapy dogs in the department. I love dogs, and so it's kind of selfish of me, but B, Georgia State did this once and they haven't done it again. And I don't know what it costs, but I think it would be a tremendous kind of outreach to students. And as we're where everybody's vying to recruit students, and this would be a really great service to students who are stressed out for a variety of reasons. And so it's something that we're talking about. I'll let you know how it goes. But I think dogs will bring boatloads of students into the department. The thing to keep in mind, well, and you have a quad out here, you could just do it right outside.
They do during exams.
Do they?
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Puppies and dogs.
I'll be over for that.
Stress.
Yeah. It's the other thing to keep in mind is with ADA, the law for ADA is that there's it's part of equal opportunity. So, that could be, so you think of ramps for wheelchairs, and, it needs to be accessible, but that goes for learning disabilities, it goes for cognitive disabilities as well. So it's not just about, physical disabilities. But again, they need to be on record with ODS, make sure, ask that question. What about, another issue that is curious about academia and higher ed that I don't think you hear so much about in, say, K through 12 is issues of academic freedom, First Amendment rights. Because we're, humanists and we're focused on, communicating, and in language programs we're focused on kind of talking about other cultures. All of a sudden there's some murky issues that come up in regards to First Amendment rights. So the first thing I would say, because and some students maybe haven't been abroad, they haven't had much exposure to other cultures, and so they don't have the language to talk about other cultures more than what they've seen in films, or so they will begin to operate in stereotypes. And then again, study abroad comes in. There's some, especially if it's a shorter study abroad. If they're there for a year, they can go through the whole cycle of they're enamored with the other culture, they hate the other culture. Then it kind of balances out, and they have a realistic kind of appreciation for the other culture, and are able to kind of function on a day-to-day basis. But if it's a shorter study abroad, a 5-week thing, I don't know that they would have the time to push through that period of kind of othering and kind of being enamored with the exotic other. And in class, what I suggest is embrace that, don't avoid stereotypes, but embrace it as a kind of springboard for conversation about where those stereotypes come from and what they mean and things like that. Sometimes we take our roles as, well, we're experts on this, and we take it too seriously. You need to I advocate for kind of engaging the student and letting them kind of explore their thoughts and evolving on their own terms, right? But kind of nudging them gently in in a certain direction. You know, the other thing is sometimes, you know, we bring our own biases to the classroom, and so I think it helps the conversation if we recognize our own biases. And I think, as Max would say, like, let's focus on proficiency. Like, as long as they're talking, right, and talking in the target language, like, let's have those conversations. Again, at the end of the day, all of this stuff comes down to what we do, which is communication. You know, get them talking, let's have conversations, and, you know, and through communications, you know, we're kind of bridging those cultural differences. Student conflict. So I have some other areas, but I know there's like 15 minutes left. Do you want to go over the quiz, or do you have you want to talk about other things, other questions? What? You want? Okay, let's go over the quiz real quick, because I do want you to know if you got, and I do have the answers here for everybody, because I would hate for you all to get sued on this, you know, because then I feel like I would let you down. So. So okay, is the first one an unauthorized person? Yo, you get a phone call. Okay, I'm on. You get a phone call from someone identifying himself as a student asking about his grades. Can you give out that information? No. Please say no. Yeah. Oh, okay. Like, you know, you need some sort of facial or retina identification process. You know, so no, you cannot. Like, clearly, you need to have somebody's ID. Like. And even if they give you their ID, like, that is not enough proof, clearly. You receive an email message from a reputable employer asking for names and addresses of students with a GPA of 3.0 or better. They have a good job offer. Can you help students get jobs by giving out this information? No. What can you do? What solution could you offer? Because you do want students to do it the opposite. Say, you know what? Let me send this to my students, right? And you could send it to everybody and just say, hey, here's the requirement. You need a 3.0 or above, right? But you can't just give this guy that information, or a woman. You receive a subpoena in the mail. That's always a good day. Nothing like a shot of adrenaline. It appears to be a legal court-ordered subpoena. Should you supply the student information? No? Did anybody say yes? Yeah, your first call is legal. Like, run, don't walk, right? So.
Does subpoenas get sent in the mail, or are they always personally delivered?
That I don't know. This is
Subpoenas get sent in the mail.
Certified mail usually.
Oh.
Yeah.
I guess they want you to sign.
Sometimes they're hand delivered by like a U.S. Marshal or something like that. But yeah, then that's scary. But it depends. Like, it could be yes or it could be no. But clearly, the first thing to do is pick up the phone and call legal. I wouldn't email and say, "Dear legal, I just got this curious piece of mail. Could you please respond when you have a chance?" Like, no, like, immediately. You get a frantic phone call from an individual who says he is a student's husband, brother, father, etc., and must get in touch with her immediately because of a family emergency. Can you tell him where and when the next class is today?
No.
Yeah, why is that a problem? Yeah, and we had an issue with a faculty member whose graduate assistant became her stalker, and it was scary. And so then we had pictures of her all over the department saying, you know, if anybody sees this person, because we had a restraining order, like, it got crazy. But yeah, but she could have called and said, hey, when does so-and-so get out of class? Then you have a real problem. You know, so information about student schedule is covered by FERPA. A better response would be to have a member of the college administration go find the student and have them call home immediately. So you say, well, if you need to get a hold of them, we have their schedule, we'll go pull them out of class and we'll have them call you. Is it wrong for professors to leave personally identifiable exams or papers in a box for students to pick up? I feel like we all know that now. And going back to what I was saying about having staff keep records of grades from previous semesters, previously we would have faculty and grad students and limited term faculty email their grade book, and now we're told no, that's not okay. It needs to be, we have this send a file thing, so it's like this encrypted, it's kind of cumbersome, but you have to go in and like attach it and then send it, but it's a protected kind of email delivery, document delivery system. So, but yeah, having papers in a box for a student to pick up, like if they're in public view, even if they're in an envelope, is not okay.
What if it's something that's not graded? I'm trying to think of something, but
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, that would be okay.
Draft paper.
yeah, I mean, or something you just,
Comments.
it's just like, check it, like you just give it back. I don't
But
know.
isn't
I'm
a
just
check
trying-
a grade?
Is it about the grade?
I think it's about the,
Or is
that's
it the
right.
content, the fact that
It's about the grade, I think, because I mean, I've left papers in my mailbox or gotten papers in my mailbox. Like I don't know that it's technically about the actual information that's in the paper. I think it's more about kind of protected private information, such as a grade, or if they have their student number on there. Hung?
My
Did-
students put their ID numbers on everything here.
Yeah.
And I never ask for that.
Yeah.
They put it on everything.
Just in case you're unsure, like you confuse them with the other person with that same name.
Why are you doing this?
There's a lot of doppelgangers out there. Hung, did you have a question?
Yeah, so you wouldn't even put it in an envelope and then put it in?
Yeah, I put it in, like, if I have to leave something for a student, I always put it in an envelope. And because that little string that loops around, like, that's like Fort Knox. Nobody's getting in that. So, I'm joking. But yeah, I would put it, and you could put confidential. I mean, I have a stamp that says confidential, so I'm sure people respect that. Wax seal. Oh, I love that. I'm going home with that. That's great. An unauthorized person retrieves information from a computer screen that was left unattended. I just felt my heart, like my blood pressure go up. Under FERPA, is the institution responsible?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're on a public computer and you have opened up like the students' grades and then you walked away, that's, I mean, if it's in your office, that's one thing, but, like we have certain areas like here, like there's, if you open up any kind of like private, you log in, and so I'm always telling faculty, like log out, just log out of the computer, don't leave it in, because then you're also like, somebody could come along and open, like if you were checking email, and you had an email from a student asking about their grade or whatever, just private information about a student in an email, and you just were like, well, I closed that, but I didn't log out. Like, just log it, shut it down, just shut it all down, right? To err on the side of like extreme,
But just sort of thinking that you mentioned in your office, I know faculty members whose big screen is visible from the door of their office.
Don't do that. That's bad. Because even, I'm really aware, for example, if I get a student grade complaint or a grade appeal, and so I have their grades and I have it all printed out, and I have the student email printed out, I put that in an envelope in my office because I don't want to have that on my desk and then somebody else come in and they can see all that. So I'm really aware of like, okay, what's visible on my desk? And my desk can get really messy. And so but I'm really aware of like, what's private information, protected information that's on my desk that if other people see it could create a problem. And so I have a kind of folder or an envelope or something always handy to just put it in there and tuck it away. But yeah, I mean, if a computer is visible, even if it's visible in their private office, but visible, like that's a blurry line, but I would err on the side of just minimize it. Just that little button, just get it off the screen, right? Professor X, I love that, I love X-Men. So Professor X wants to know the GPA of student Y and says he's entitled to it because he's a school official and needs to complete his own official academic responsibilities. Do you give it to him without further question? No. And that's what we were talking about earlier. It's like, the faculty are not, I think it's informed employees. They're not informed employees or something like that, like where they have access to all student information. Staff are, not all staff, but certain staff are. Like if they have access to student records or if they're looking to see if a student has a hold or something like that. Like there's certain staff that do have access to that information, but a faculty does not. A newspaper reporter calls to ask for a student's major and dates of attendance. Is it okay to give it out as long as the student has not requested directory information confidentiality? Yeah, it's okay. Names of students, dates of attendance, major, degrees earned are generally designated as directory information. Now, I think it might depend on the university. I don't know if that is readily visible. If you can just search.
Emory students have to sign a waiver.
Oh,
of some
okay.
sort because they're legal adults.
Yeah,
And
it could be. This one kind of surprised. I would think that there's some of that information, like a major, like where would you find that in a directory? Like, I don't know.
I just would not want to be quoted by a newspaper.
Yeah, well, that's right.
yeah, and it's newspaper.
But wouldn't the best response be to say, please call the registrar?
That's right. I would, exactly. I would say, yeah, if you can delegate that to somebody else, like that's the way to go. But yeah, I would definitely say, go ahead and call the registrar's office. An employer asks if you can verify that a student has received a degree. The student has no confidentiality hold, so should you do it? That's fine. Like verifying, just saying, yeah, they have this degree, and they have no confidentiality hold is fine. Your daughter attends the institution at which you work. She needs her transcript sent to a company so she can get a job. There is a deadline. Your daughter does not have time to take care of it herself. Can you make the request on her behalf? Generally not. But then there may be a different conversation to be had with the daughter. But, you know, but so I'll leave the answers here. So, and this is something that at the workshop for new chairs we do every summer. So this is under fair use. You can make copies of this and share it with whoever you want. As is, I also have this fair use check sheet, which can come in handy. But I'm sure, I would be really surprised if Emory doesn't have something similar. I think there's a federal kind of checklist that is distributed. So.
Our learning platform, Canvas will say, "Oh, you can't put that up."
Yeah.
But it would be nice to see a checklist so we can.
Yeah, I'll just leave that there. I was, because I teach a lot of film in my classes, and this is where it's like, well, how do you give students access? Like, so I'll put films on reserve. The best thing would be to have a platform where I could put a copy of the film. And there's one semester I was talking with our fair use expert in legal about films, because often it's about text, but about media, it's really difficult because a 2-hour film to put that on reserve, but it's not, so I just said, you know what, forget about it. Like, I cannot continue like going back and forth about this. There's a specific film I would love to show, but you know what, it's in PAL, in Region 2, and so what I do now, and it's not the greatest solution, what's available on Netflix in the US, and what's available on Amazon, and what's available on Hulu or Amazon Prime, so, and then build my syllabus that way, like, and just try and figure it out, because otherwise if I have to rip the movie into a MP4, already I'm violating fair use, like, because the market must be protected at all costs. But so, that definitely I just cannot do. And I have some films that are just no longer in circulation or distribution. So it's, I don't want to get the university sued. That could hinder my promotion. And GSU is particularly sensitive to fair use because we were sued some years back. They're really sensitive because people were putting, it was the natural sciences. Mm-hmm. They were putting entire books, if your textbooks weren't so damn expensive, you maybe didn't have to do that. But they were copying entire books and putting them on like iCollege or Canvas. So yeah, that's a no-no. I don't know, other questions or comments, concerns? I don't know if there's something that I didn't hit that you wanted to talk about?
From our experience, we use course readers on our courses, and we'll give them to our course reserves, and they will do the checks for you. So
Yeah.
the library checks to see if these pass the fair use
That's right.
rules.
That's
So
right.
it's a nice service.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And if you do like a course packet, they'll vet to make sure that, there is another thing, that, now that you mention that, with academia.edu, that people think, well, I have this article, I can just upload it to academia.edu. And, and academia.edu is a venture capitalist like initiative. And that stuff is not necessarily copyright protected. The way to do it, because and what you said just brought this to my mind, like if you have a kind of repository through the library, they will get the copyright and the fair use stuff, and they'll vet all of that. And then on academia.edu, you can put a link to the repository where your articles are. And that's what, different librarians I've talked to have said, like that's the way to do it. So it's a similar thing, like, and, the librarians, they're just sitting there, they're not doing anything. So just put them to work, like send them your course packets, send them your CV and say, go get this stuff, right? And I'm joking, they work really hard.
They can also buy access, buy rights to films. Because we
Yeah,
have the film
that's right.
stream and,
Yeah, library budgets are getting tighter, so that's one thing. But and there are services now, and I know there's one, oh man, and I can't remember what it is, but and I think it's specifically German film, and I can't remember what, but there's like an online service where you can get access to films. Yeah, and there's other ways where you can use, well, we'll talk about that off camera. So there's ways you can kind of use VPNs and create like access like Netflix in Spain and have access, at least have access, but that's more for personal use. I wouldn't do that with classes. Because then you start requiring students to do that. It's like, wow, okay, clearly we've crossed a line. Did you have a question?
I think I do. So is there a copyright concern if you're showing a movie as a class activity during your class time?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
If you, because the class, so it's on the checklist, because if it's for educational purposes, okay, that's good. And if it's for a specific population that has registered and has, so unless you were to say, hey, everybody, we're going to show, Iron Man on the quad tonight, and everybody's invited, and bring a friend, like that's a different thing. If it's open to the public, then that's problematic. And it's even more problematic if you're charging admission. So then it gets really wonky. So with our Cinefest, like if we want to show a film, like we need to make sure, and there's all kinds of cottage, I would call it a cottage industry, but it's really a full-fledged industry of people who have the rights, and you have to pay them to get the rights. And one company, I don't know if it still exists, but it was called Swank, which sounded weird to me, but they would have so if you wanted to show a Latin American film or Spanish film, now for Spanish language film, there's now a company that organizes film series called Pragda, and they take care of and it's like for $500 you get like 5 films, and you get the publicity materials, and you could show it on campus, you could show it publicly, and I know people that have done it, and it have been really happy with it. And so now there are mechanisms through which you can get the films, have the rights, get the publicity materials, and now I believe they send you like posters and flyers and things like that for whatever films, and they have a ton of films. And they also have kind of prepackaged film series. So if you say, well, I want to do something on, gender issues, and it'll be Spain and Latin America, and including Brazil. And so they'll have like prepackaged themes, immigration or what have you. So I can send you the link if you want. But Pragda, so like Pragda, yeah. But they're based here in the U.S. I think they were based out of Miami, if I remember correctly. So, but yeah, you don't just go, like get a movie on Netflix and pop it in and say, oh, everybody, sometimes the student clubs do that, and maybe, and I guess there's some flexibility with student clubs. It's a kind of member group, and it is for educational purposes. And I tell them, like, as long as you're having a discussion about the film, that really helps protect us. But don't put a big ad out, on the highway and a billboard saying, everybody come to this. Other questions, concerns? Well, hopefully I've been able to help give you some strategies and tips and to avoid getting yourself sued.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thank you, everybody.